The views and opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Open Sky Radio. Please be advised.
Hello everybody, welcome to The Fire You Can't Put Out. With you as always, my name is Melvin. I want to thank you for joining me for episode number 42 of this fun little show. This was an absolutely banner week if you are a progressive, and I definitely am. And this was not your week if you were a Tea Partier. The great thing about this week was that it was election week. Now, this is what they referred to as an off-year election. General elections, obviously, are the years where we have presidential elections, and those happen every 4 years. 04, 08, 12, you get it, you can count by 4. Then, of course, the off-year elections are the even-numbered years. In the even-numbered years, that's when the House of Representatives comes up, and there's also other local elections. But this year is 2013, so it's off. Most places didn't have any sort of major ballot measures or anything like that. Everybody had something, but it wasn't a lot. In the city where I live, we re-elected a new mayor. In New Jersey and Virginia, they elected, new governors. New governors. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. I want to run down some of the election results, and I want to go ahead and point a few things out. It wasn't 100% across the board great for progressives, but 90%. We'll take it. New York City, Bill de Blasio won the mayoral race. Now, de Blasio campaigned on a bold progressive platform, promising to address the city's widening income inequality, gentrification, and hollowing out of the middle class. Okay? And he won, but 73%. Wow, it's crazy. He just trounced his Republican challenger. De Blasio, and this comes from Peter Dreyer over at the Huffington Post, pledged to end the city's racist stop-and-frisk police policies to expand affordable housing, increase pre-kindergarten classes by raising taxes on residents over $500,000. Yeah, if you're a millionaire and you're in New York, your taxes are going up. Subject to approval, of course, by the state legislature. After winning a come-from-behind victory in the Democratic primary, de Blasio built a powerful grassroots campaign that drew on unions, community organizers, and other progressives. On Election Day, he had more than 10,000 volunteers turning out voters. In New Jersey, Chris Christie. This guy is starting to become, in my opinion, somewhat of a threat. So New Jersey decided to give Chris Christie a second term, so last year the state passed a minimum wage hike, and it hit Chris Christie's desk, and Chris Christie vetoed it, and the people went ahead and had that veto overridden. Okay, so they like Christie, but they don't always necessarily like the ideas that he puts forward. That's kind of a strange one. And of course, as soon as Chris Christie wins again, and he won with 60%, by the way, here comes all the talk about President Christie. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, obviously. So in SeaTac, Washington, this was crazy, and I think this has the potential to start a national conversation. We've been having a conversation on this show and other places, but with it finally passing in one city, I'll get to that in just a second. With it passing in this city, it might start passing in other places. SeaTac Washington, embraced the Good Jobs Initiative to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour for the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport and all airport-related businesses, including hotels, car rental agencies, parking lots. So there's about 6,000 workers in that town. For those of you not familiar with SeaTac, it's over here in our little neck of the woods. SeaTac is in between Seattle and Tacoma. SeaTac. It's essentially the airport. But there's quite a few people that work there. And they went ahead and voted and said, yeah, we want to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I think people realize, they say, well, you can't raise the minimum wage, you're going to kill small businesses. Here's the thing, if you're a business and you can't afford to pay your workers a living wage, I'm going to make the case that what you're doing on its face is immoral. There's a way. And when we talk about the minimum wage, we're not necessarily going after small businesses. Small businesses generally connected to the community. The owners generally work with the employees. They have to face the employees, and those businesses generally pay a good wage. I used to work for a small businessman at a company called Inland Fastening, and yeah, he paid me a good wage. I was one of just a small handful of employees, but he treated me good. Anytime I've worked at a business that small, they treated me good. Seems the larger the businesses are, the less they seem to care about people. Okay, let's stick with Seattle. Seattle became the second largest city in the country to elect an openly gay mayor. State Senator Ed Murray, a gay Democratic state legislator, appears at this time to be headed for victory in Seattle's mayoral race. Let me say why it appears. Okay, we're going to talk about I-522 as well. Appears. In Washington State, we don't have polls. We've got all mail-in ballots. And the last day you can have your ballot postmarked before you send it in. You can send it in on election day. As long as it's postmarked for election day, you can send it in. So sometimes some of these things take as much as a week before we find out how they turn out. Unless they're not close at all, then we can find out those things essentially on election night. Just for some point of reference, we are taping this show on Friday, November 8th. So for those of you keeping score at home. All right. In Boston, State Representative Marty Walsh edged out City Council member John Connolly to become the city's next mayor. Marty Walsh, is a longtime labor leader. These are all progressive victories up to this point, okay? In Minneapolis, community organizer and Occupy Homes activist Ty Moore was in a close race for a seat on the city council. Moore was running as a socialist alternative candidate against Democrat Farm Labor Party candidate Alejandro Cano. By Wednesday morning, neither Moore or Cano had reached the threshold to be declared a winner. So we're still waiting to hear from that. Here's the big one. And we've been covering a lot of them on this show. And this one made me very, very happy. And I've got a couple of things to say about this. Terry McAuliffe beat the Cooch. Let me back up. Ken Cuccinelli, who, by the way, obviously absolutely lost on what an urban term is. Ken Cuccinelli, who prefers to be called the Cooch, was running for, he wanted to be, governor of Virginia, and he was the Tea Party candidate. He was incredibly hard right. He had the crimes against nature's law because he was so anti-gay. He figured a crimes against nature's law, you can automatically just start scooping up gay men because obviously they're not having what would be considered natural sex. Terry McAuliffe ran against him. Now, the polls showed Terry McAuliffe 15 points ahead of him. With African Americans, with women, his numbers were Terry McAuliffe's numbers were astronomically higher than were Ken Cuccinelli's. But when it was all done, it came, and then of course for the general election, they had Terry McAuliffe 47 to 46. So he beat him by 1 point, even though the polls themselves showed McAuliffe 15 points ahead of him. We covered on last week's show, and I believe the week before, about how Ken Cuccinelli, who is the state's attorney general, and still is the state's attorney general, it's one of the few states where you don't have to step down from that job in order to run for governor, had purged tens of thousands of people off the voter rolls, hoping that would stop Terry McAuliffe from winning. It didn't stop him, but it did make it so McAuliffe just squeaked by. And so now Virginia is going to become one of the states in the union where they're going to opt into Obamacare because their current conservative was not opting into Obamacare. The other thing about Virginia is for the last, I'd say 30, 40 years, whatever the president was, the governor of Virginia was the exact opposite. So this is the first time in, I think, about 40 years that they've elected, say if the president right now is a Democrat, and they got these off-year elections. So we have a Democrat in the White House in 2009, and then in 2009, they elect a Republican as their governor. He, of course, is in a world of scandal right now for bribery and all kinds of other things. So it's interesting that for the first time in 40 years, we have a Democratic president, and they elected a Democratic governor. Okay, I-522. Let's talk about this. This was the ballot initiative here in the beautiful state of Washington that would have required that GMO products be labeled. It really was that simple. When this hit the ballot and polling was done on it, its numbers were through the roof. People absolutely loved the idea. It's just labeling. Hey, give us the choice. We want to know what's in our food. What's wrong with that? So when it polled incredibly high. Living in Washington over the last number of months has been kind of painful because the anti-ads have been running like crazy. The pro side, the pro 522 people, raised and spent about $8 million. Okay? About $8 million. Most of that money coming from inside Washington State. The other side, the anti-side, the anti-522 side, over $30 million. Okay? I would love to say 100% of the anti-money came from outside the state, but it's not true. $550 came from inside the state on the anti-side. $550. As this sits right now, 54% voted against I-522, with the rest voting for it. Washington State, my beautiful Washingtonians, got bought out. These ads have been running ad nauseum, including during football games, which is not cheap airtime, by the way. But we here, unfortunately, in the state of Washington, all this outside money came in, over $30 million, outspent the pro people 4-1, and got it defeated. 99.9999999% of that money coming from outside Washington, and it defeated an initiative in our state. So that was one of the bad, and they're still counting ballots, but I really don't think it's going to pass. Portland, Maine, approved a marijuana tax. And that's great. So they'll get more money into their state. Now, Colorado, the 51st state initiative failed. The conservative part of Colorado wants to separate from the more progressive part of Colorado, and so there were, I think, about a dozen counties that were trying to secede. Yeah, it was a true secession. And that one, it appears, has failed. I believe that they're still counting ballots on that one. Okay? All the money that's dumped into these elections to buy your opinion, okay? To buy your favor, okay? There's a lot of now the word junk science gets thrown around an awful lot. Conservatives like to call something junk science when whatever is being discovered scientifically, whenever it doesn't reflect what they believe, they like to call it junk science. And then, of course, Democrats, by and large, call actual junk science junk science. Now, there's a group called the American Council on Science and Health. Okay, this article coming to us from a Mother Jones investigation. Shout out to those over at motherjones.com. So, the American Council on Science and Health bills itself as an independent research and advocacy organization devoted to debunking junk science. It's a controversial outfit, and it has been for some time. It's a group of scientists concerned that many important public policies related to health and the environment do not have a sound scientific basis. Okay, so an internal investigation, financial documents that were turned over to Mother Jones showed that ACSH depends heavily on funding from corporations that have a financial stake in the scientific debates that it aims to shape. The group also directly solicits donations from the industry sources around these specific issues. According to ACSH documents from July 1st, 2012 to December 20th, 2012, 58% of donations to the council came from large corporations and private foundations, which included Chevron, Coca-Cola, Bristol-Myers Squibb, 3M, Bayer, Crop Science, Procter & Gamble. Dr. Gilbert Ross, the group's executive director, declined to answer specific questions about ACSH's fundraising. He did not dispute the authenticity of the documents provided to Mother Jones, though. According to Ross, only science-based facts hold sway in our publications, even if the outcome is not pleasing to our contributors. Ross was previously convicted for defrauding New York State's Medicaid program of roughly $8 million, and he did 23 months in prison. So everybody, let's believe that guy. Elizabeth Whelan is a Harvard-trained public health scientist, and she founded ACSH in 1978. She launched it with $100,000 in seed money from the Sarah Scaife Foundation, which has also supported the Heritage Foundation, the conservative Heritage Foundation, the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, who, by the way, writes most of our laws, and Americans for Tax Reform and other conservative groups. When ACSH was founded, Whelan stated that the council intends to remain free from financial ties with corporations with a financial interest in the topics that we are investigating. Initially, ACSH disclosed its donors, and it was obvious that the group embraced numerous causes connected to its funders. The newly revealed documents say that ACSH staffers should approach potential corporate financial backers with pitches geared towards specific issues. This brings us to Prop 37 in California. Prop 37 in California on the 2012 ballot was the same thing that we had here in Washington. It was going to label genetically modified foods. Okay? The fake science group, ACSH, did some fake science work on it. That fake science was thrown into ads backed by billionaires, and Proposition 37 in California last year was defeated. Much the way that I-522, with more junk science and more billionaire money, was just defeated right here in Washington State. ACSH has also become a vocal player in the debate over hydraulic fracking, or fracturing, or fracking. Fracking, Whelan wrote, doesn't pollute water or air. The Daily Caller story included no disclosure of the funding ACSH has received from the energy industry. Big energy companies and ACSH go way back. In a 1992 memo, Whelan called ACSH the great defender of petrochemical companies, and on an ACSH-run Facebook page supporting fracking, the group acknowledges accepting money from industry. According to the documents, ACSH was awarded a grant for fracking work from the Triad Foundation. Triad has also supported the Heritage Foundation. My goodness, it's almost like they're all the exact same freaking people. These are the junk science people. And these are the people that are buying your opinion in elections. These are the people that are giving us what we are supposedly worried about, which is junk science. And yet, people are just accepting it. ACSH is not concerned. Saying fracking. Think about fracking. Sticking essentially a pipe into the ground, okay, and just with chemicals and water, just blowing apart the shale with tremendous pressure. Okay, think about that. To release the natural gas. Earthquakes around fracking areas have increased exponentially since fracking became a thing. And fracking, by the way, was essentially there's more nuance to it, obviously, but it was essentially contributed to being come up with by Dick Cheney. And we all know Dick Cheney loves the planet and wouldn't lie to us. Free market folks love the idea of just allowing them to continue destroying the planet, poisoning the water, poisoning the air, right? Because it's freedom, 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 freedom. Freedom will make America, set America free. Free market moralists, they like to call themselves. This comes from the New York Times Opinionator, an article written by Amia Srinivasan on 10/20/2013, and you can look it up if you want to read the whole thing. I just want to get into the 4 questions because I think these are fantastic. In 1971, we're going to talk about 2 competing visions here, okay? In 1971, John Rawls published A Theory of Justice, the most significant articulation and defense of political liberalism in the 20th century. Since genuine rather than on paper equality of opportunity requires substantial access to resources, which is shelter, medical care, and education, Rawls' rational actors would also make their society a redistributive one, ensuring a decent standard of life for everybody. That's Rawls. Let's talk about Nozick. In 1974, 3 years later, Robert Nozick countered with Anarchy, State, and Utopia. He argued that a just society was simply one that resulted from an unfettered free market and that the only legitimate function of the state was to ensure the workings of the free market by enforcing contracts and protecting citizens against violence, theft, and fraud. So, questions. If you know a free market moralist, these are fantastic. Dig this. Question 1. Is there any exchange between 2 people in the absence of direct physical compulsion by one party against another, or the threat thereof necessarily free? Okay? If you say yes, then you think that people can never be coerced into action by circumstances that do not involve direct physical compulsion of another person. For example, suppose a woman and her children are starving, and the only way she can feed her family, apart from theft, is to prostitute herself or sell her organs. Since she undertakes these acts of exchange not because of direct physical coercion by another, but only because she's compelled by hunger and a lack of alternatives, she is free. Right? It fits your definition. Is any free, meaning not physically compelled, exchange morally permissible? If you say yes, then you think that any free exchange can't be exploitive and thus immoral. Suppose that I inherited from my rich parents a large plot of vacant land, and that you are my poor landless neighbor. I offer you the following deal. You can work the land doing all the hard labor of tilling, sowing, irrigating, and harvesting, and I will pay you $1 a day for a year. After that, I will sell the crop for $50,000. You decide that this is your best available option and so take the deal. Since you consent to this exchange, there is nothing morally problematic about it, right? Question 3. Do people deserve all they are able and only what they are able to get through free exchange? If you say yes, you think that what people deserve is largely a matter of luck. Why? Well, first, because only a tiny minority of the population is lucky enough to inherit wealth from their parents, a fact obviously lost on Mitt Romney last year, who famously advised America's youth to take a shot, go for it, take the risk, borrow money from your parents if you have to in order to start a business. Old tone deaf. Since giving money to your kids is just another example of free exchange, there's nothing wrong with the accumulation of wealth and privilege in the hands of the very few. Second, people's capacity to produce goods and services in demand on the market is largely a function of the lottery of birth. Their genetic predispositions, their parents' education, the amount of race and sex-based discrimination to which they're subjected, their access to health care and education. It's also a function of what the market happens to value at a particular time. Dig this. Van Gogh, William Blake, Edgar Allan Poe, Vermeer Melville, and Schubert all died broke. If you're a good Nosnickian, you think that they all got what they deserved. And finally, are people under no obligation to do anything they don't freely want to do or freely commit themselves to doing? If you say yes, then you think the only moral requirements are the ones we freely bring on ourselves, say by making promises or contracts. Suppose I'm walking to the library. I see a man drowning in the river. I decide that the pleasure I would get from saving his life wouldn't exceed the cost of getting wet and the delay. So I walk on by. Since I made no contract with the man, I'm under no obligation to save him. Correct? Of course, if you've got a conscience, it'll weigh on your mind all day. More and more people are identifying themselves as libertarians. I got behind a gentleman in traffic whose bumper sticker said, socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and he identified himself as a libertarian. So if you're a free market moralist and you believe these things, are you really moral? See, the Nosnickian view implies what, from the perspective of common sense morality, is absurd. That a desperate person who sells her organs or body does so freely, that it's fine to pay someone a paltry sum while profiting hugely off their labor, thus people deserve to get rich because of accidents of birth, and that there's nothing wrong with walking by a drowning man. Thus, Novik's view must be wrong. Justice is not simply the unfettered exercise of the free market. Free market morality isn't anything of the sort. And we are getting more and more immoral all the time. And what was once seen as the land of opportunity is becoming not so much. A lot of conservative folks, or folks from the right side of the aisle, tend to dismiss the fact that America doesn't have the opportunity that it once did. Whenever they hear about somebody poor, they automatically assume that they're not working, and they tell them, go get a job, you bum. Or if someone's on welfare, they say, quit suckling off the American teat, off the government teat. Quit taking my money. We'll cover more of that next week. There's some pretty startling numbers out on that. But I want to cover this. This comes from John Walker over at firedoglake.com. The number of Americans who believe regular people have plenty of opportunities to get ahead has dropped sharply over the past decade. This is one of the most profound changes in how Americans view their own country. This comes from Gallup. Okay, the percent who believe that there's not much opportunity, okay, went from 8% in 1952 to 17% in 1997, and then 15 years later, 2011 to 2012, is 41 and 43% respectively. From 8 to 43% in 60 years, okay? But, almost doubling, more than doubling since 1997. The people who believe that there's plenty of opportunity in that same year, 1952, was 87%, which dropped to 81 in 1997, and most recently, 2011, 2012, 52 and 57 respectively. 57 and 52 respectively, sorry. So it's dropping essentially right now, especially in the last decade, precipitously. And I think one of the big reasons for that is, one, there really is. A lot of the rules that are being written against us, not in our favor, quite honestly. Legislators taking handouts, lobbyists writing laws, and then our opinions, our feelings, we're essentially drowned out. Let's get into Obamacare. There's been, I would be remiss if I didn't cover this week. There's been an awful lot of news as of late about people losing their health care, and they're saying it's because of Obamacare, saying that their premiums are going up because of Obamacare. So what's really going on here? Okay, The fact is that some health insurance, by the way, this comes from Jeffrey Young over at HuffPo. The fact is some health insurance on the market today is just lousy. There's a big reason why even people who have health insurance historically have gone bankrupt when their medical bills started piling up. Even if you have a pre-existing condition, or you're older, or a woman, you've been paying even more for that insurance. So don't tell me how great insurance was before Obamacare. The law, by the way, standardizes health plans. So what are those standards? Now, dig this. The Affordable Care Act requires health insurance plans to meet certain criterion. Okay? It also limits a subscriber's out-of-pocket medical costs. For 2014, that amount is $6,350, and for that's for individuals, and $12,700 for families. Okay? In addition, all plans must include services for the so-called 10 essential benefits, which is preventative and wellness services and chronic disease management, prescription drugs, emergency services, hospitalization, ambulatory patient services, rehabilitative services and devices, laboratory services, mental health and substance use disorder services, including behavioral health treatment, maternity and newborn care, and pediatric services, including dental and vision care. Okay? Health insurance companies are deciding that they don't want to cover all those things. Okay? The disruption is happening despite President Obama saying over and over again, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. He must have said it 36 times since the ACA became law 3 years ago. And now, this week, he came out and he apologized to the American people because he knows people are getting dropped, and they're being told that they're being dropped because of Obamacare. Okay? For one thing, health insurance companies have never ever needed a reason to discontinue unprofitable plans. Kick people off, change benefits, or raise prices. Those things happen every year, even to people with really good job-based health benefits. Okay? On the individual health insurance market, plans are typically sold with one-year contracts. After that, the insurance companies could practically do whatever they wanted, although they had to offer you an alternative like they're doing now. Only now you have an actual choice. So they're finding out that these plans that they're offering people, and by the way, private for-profit health insurance companies are banks. That's all they are. They're not involved in health. They don't care. They're there to take in a bunch of money and release a little bit of that money. They're there to make a profit. They don't care if you live or die. And hell, if you get sick, they'd really rather that you just die so that they can keep all of your premiums. Okay? So, people are calling up, or they're sending out these letters, and they're saying that we're canceling your health plan because of Obamacare, but you can get this plan instead, which now costs 2 times more or 3 times more. Okay? But what they're not telling you is that you can go into the open market and get a much better plan. Okay? One of these companies was confronted in the last week, okay, by a news organization. I won't name them here. And they said, why are you being dishonest with people? Why aren't you telling people that you're dropping their plans because you're greedy? This is a last-ditch effort to make money off of people now that people have an actual choice in the market. And they said, hey, we assume people knew that those things were out there. So they're calling you, telling you they're dropping your plan. They're dropping your plan because it does not jive with the law. Then they're telling you that you can get a plan, but it's way, way more money. It's a last-ditch effort to make more money off of you. Because now you can go into the open market and you don't need them. Okay? So, obviously the idea, a big part of what's going on here is people on the individual market So under the new system, obviously, Obamacare puts more people under those umbrellas, and it spreads cost around more. There's a piece of Obamacare, and it's one of the it's not covered all that often, and it's really important. And I'm a little surprised that it's not getting more press. And what it does is it eventually allows states at some point in the future, I believe it's after 2016, If they want, they can begin crafting universal health care. This is how it was implemented in Canada. This is why Canada has universal health care, okay? Vermont is leading the charge on this right now. Vermont seeks to offer the nation's first attempt at truly universal health care. Democratic Governor Peter Shumlin has stated that health care should be a right, not a privilege. So, their plan combines universal coverage with new cost controls in an effort to move away from a system in which the more procedures doctors and hospitals perform, the more they get paid, to one which providers have a set budget to care for a set number of patients. Vermont is the ideal place for something like this, okay, because it's small, having only 626,000 citizens, and consequently, its people have been able to maintain a sense of communal good for one another. It's also ranked as one of the most liberal states in the country, so obviously prime for something like this. This isn't happening in a red state. There's also the fact that Vermont has already come close to universal health care. By the 1990s, 96% of children had health insurance and 91% of adults. The state would only have to add a relatively small number of uninsured people to realize the 100% coverage goal. Vermont, okay, covered, so as the rollout continues in Washington, obviously, and people see the disaster with the website, Vermont hasn't even blinked. They are working hard on getting their website up and going, and they're working towards universal health care. I believe in 10 years, the country will be most, if not all, universal. The red states are going to be the last holdouts. That's just the way it's going to be. Texas has the most uninsured people in the nation, and they are opting out of Obamacare. So I believe by the end of the month, and Obama has stated this many times, he expects the healthcare.gov to be up and running fully. In Oregon, they just hired a couple thousand people to start processing paper forms because they were having trouble with their website as well. There's a way to make this happen, but you have to want it to happen. And quite honestly, conservatives are having more fun throwing sand into the gears right now. We just went through Halloween, and I want two things. Current events and racism in the family. Okay? Most offensive Halloween costume this year, by some standards, mine is going to be the second one here, not this first one. Jessica Black of Craigsville, Virginia, who was just upholding a time-honored family tradition when she decided to send her 7-year-old out as a KKK member. She says, "My brother was a Klansman when he was in kindergarten and when he was 13. Her son, Jackson, apparently saw the white supremacist costume in the movie Fried Green Tomatoes and made his mom proud when he asked if he could dress up as a Klansman for Halloween. I did tell him that if you do it, there's going to be a lot of people talking about you. There's going to be a lot of people saying bad things about you when you wear it. Though not everyone who's racist is outraged by the costume. She defended her position by saying it's supposed to be, this is the mom, it's supposed to be white with white, black with black, man with man, or man with woman, and all that stuff. And so she says, well, so he obviously went out in the costume, dressed her son as a Klansman, went out in the costume. Yiggity yikes. This was the more offensive one to me. This one made the rounds. These weren't the only people that decided to do this, but they caught the most amount of headlines because they posted their pictures all over social media. They posted their own pictures. And it was the Trayvon Martin Halloween costumes. 3 folks, one of them wearing a shirt that says Neighbor Who Watch. Yeah, the D was dropped. And then there was the white guy in blackface with a hoodie and fake blood on his hooded sweatshirt, and the guy with the Neighbor Who Watch shirt using his fingers to act as the barrel and the hammer of a gun, pointing at the guy dressed as Trayvon Martin. So they've all been identified: William Feline, Greg Semino, and the woman standing in between them was Caitlin Semino, and they've all privatized or taken down their social media accounts. So Trayvon Martin, when dressing as a current event, there really should be. I guess I'm just asking people to have sense, you know. So guess who's back? George Zimmerman. And I swear to God, this guy's never going to go away. But this time, we're hearing from one of the jurors. The jurors have not had an easy life once people found out who they were, and they found out that they were on the Zimmerman jury. So one of the jurors in the Zimmerman trial said her life was ruined by the case and that she has doubts about the jury's verdict. Maddie, we're going to call her, gave an interview to Inside Edition's Les Trent that aired this week. Shortly after the trial concluded, Maddie lost friends who were upset by the verdict, and she lost her job at a nursing home. She said she and her husband had to sell all their possessions to make ends meet, including their kitchen table, and the family now eats on the floor. Maddie said she's now days away from having to move into a homeless shelter because she can't afford her house. Emotionally, mentally, physically, I'm so drained I can't stop thinking about the case, Maddie said in a release. I have a heart. I got to hold the gun that killed this boy. I saw pictures I didn't need to see. Maddie also told Trent she questions her reluctant decision to acquit Zimmerman of second-degree murder in the death of Trayvon Martin. She's quoted as saying, "We all know who's guilty. George Zimmerman thinks he didn't do anything wrong." Maddie previously told ABC's Robin Roberts that Zimmerman got away with murder. Maddie, by the way, was the only minority on the jury. So, Zimmerman, because he killed somebody with a gun, has become a hero to gun lovers everywhere. Okay? The hard right. And because he killed a black man, he's like a superhero to these guys. Okay? And this week, George Zimmerman decided to send his wife a bullet-riddled target as a threat. Remember, this guy's a hero to a faction of this country. Shelley Zimmerman, 26, who filed for divorce in September, says that she got a bullet-riddled target as a threat. Okay, so after he was acquitted, Zimmerman was acquitted of second-degree murder, Shelley Zimmerman called 911 stating that her husband was threatening to kill her and her father, and that he punched her father in the nose. She later stated that she never actually saw a gun and decided not to press charges. Okay, Wednesday, Radar Online obtained a photo of the bullet-riddled target that Shelley Zimmerman claims George left in her living room in late September, shortly after she asked him to get his things and move out. At the time, Shelley was in New York appearing on the Today Show. The source says that when Shelley returned to Lake Mary, Florida, she went over to the house and discovered the target with bullet holes in various quadrants. Shelley reportedly sent the photo to her lawyer stating, "Look, George sent me a subliminal message." As another source pointed out, it's not really that subliminal and it's not really that subtle. It's clearly a threat. Her lawyer wouldn't comment on this. "The person that I'm married to and now divorcing, I've kind of realized that I don't know him," Zimmerman told Matt Lauer on the Today Show. "I don't really know what he's capable of." And he's somebody's hero. A study came out, you can find this over on rawstory.com, that linked racism, gun ownership and resistance to gun laws. Like, they're all together. So a study published in the scientific journal PLOS1 found that the presence of firearms in white homes in the U.S. is associated with higher incidences of racism and a stiffer resistance to gun control policies. The study analyzed data from a large swath of white U.S. voters and was spurred by the vehemence of the gun control debate in this country in the wake of the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown. Coming from countries with strong gun policies and a 30-fold lower rate of gun-related homicides, we found that the arguments for opposing gun control counterintuitive and somewhat illogical. For example, U.S. whites oppose gun control to a far greater extent than do blacks, but whites are actually more likely to kill themselves with their guns than to be killed by someone else. Why would you keep them? So we decided to examine what social and psychological factors predict gun ownership and opposition to gun control. After accounting for income, political ideology, and education, researchers found that for each 1 point increase on a scale of 1 to 5 in symbolic racism, there was a 50% increase in the odds of having a gun in the home and a 28% increase in support for policies allowing people to carry concealed guns. There are approximately 38,000 gun-related deaths in the U.S. each year, the majority of which are African American. However, having a gun in the home increases the likelihood that a household member will die of a homicide or suicide-related gunshot wound by a 2.4 to 4.8 fold. For every 1 point increase in symbolic racism, there was a 27% increase in the likelihood that a test subject would oppose gun control measures. Racism was also strongly associated with having a gun in the house. Symbolic racism is a measure of modern racism, whereas old open racism manifested itself in Jim Crow laws and segregated restrooms. Symbolic racism consists of the same traditional values and sentiment that underpinned blatant racism, but its expression is less open. Symbolic racism most often manifests itself in opposition to policies and programs that are perceived as being beneficial to African Americans, such as welfare and food stamps. Those are dog whistle words. Even though most people on food stamps are employed, are white, are children, and are disabled, when the dog whistle language about welfare is used, it means black. Simply stated. Doesn't matter that most people on it are white or working. It means lazy blacks when they use that kind of language. Okay? People who score high in symbolic racism also typically favor policies that they perceive as punitive to blacks, such as longer prison sentences and stop and frisk. It's the second time I've said that in this show. According to a Pew Research Center report, the majority of white Americans support stricter gun control, but the results of our study suggest that those who oppose gun reform tend to have a stronger racial bias, tend to be politically and ideologically conservative, and from southern states, and have higher anti-government sentiments. Horror stories involving public shootings has dominated the debate on gun control. But what about handguns, which are far more common than what I like to call the weapons of war, or the semi-automatics? This from Lisa Martins over at OccupyDemocrats.com. Almost no attention has been paid to handguns in the debate over gun control. However, a recent study has shown that the number of children and teens hospitalized from gunshot wounds has risen almost 60% in a decade. In 70% of cases where a child or teen suffered a gunshot wound, the weapon was a handgun, not a high-powered weapon. Additionally, 19% of these gunshot wounds occurred inside the home, and about 20% occurred on the street. That's right. A fifth of children's gunshot injuries in this country are happening in the safety of their home. Currently, around 500 children and teens die a year in hospital from gunshot wounds. Now, this blew my mind. What's worse is that it's easier to get a gun than food. Currently, there are more gun retail stores in the United States than there are supermarkets. Let me say that again. Currently, there are more gun retail stores in the U.S. than there are supermarkets. That is 51,438 gun stores to 36,569 grocery stores. It's a lucrative business with over 5 million guns being manufactured in the U.S. every year. It's about money. It's always been about money there's no Second Amendment with this. People love to throw that out there, but that's not what it is. Okay? I want to get into a couple more things, and then I want to give you my final thought. So, trolls, online trolls, which we've covered at some extent in this show. A story came out recently. It's been speculated for some time that a lot of them are being paid. And there's a story that came out recently that shows, yep, they are. In his new book, Murdoch's World, David Folkenflik reveals Fox News' practice of using paid commenters with fake social media accounts to deceive the online community. Folkenflik says that members of Fox's online PR staff created between 20 and 100 fake profiles on social media accounts each. The accounts are used by PR staff in order to push the station's right-wing agenda. That's over at Fox. Okay? Most of the positions, and they put out ads for these, by the way, pay between 5 and 10 cents a post. The paid commentators ads usually appear on international freelancing sites, meaning that you do not have to live in the United States to push the Tea Party agenda. If you thought the Tea Party social media trolls were bad at English and grammar skills back when they first came on the scene, it gets worse. In order to avoid being caught, the right wing generally recruits their fake bloggers and paid commentators from outside the U.S. Okay? In a 2011 Help Wanted posting that appeared on Craigslist in Toronto, in order to elevate the reading and speaking skills of its online propaganda machine, the right wing made the mistake of trying to recruit new shills just a little too close to the U.S. The Help Wanted posting got the attention of several independent journalists in both Canada and the U.S. Folkenflik reveals that these paid commentators use a wide range of deceptive tactics to hide their true identities. Using wireless broadband connections so that the comments cannot be traced back to their source is just one of the tactics that they use. There's a large number of companies that hire bogus bloggers and paid commentators. Take, for example, Advantage Consultants, a company that went out of business after being exposed as a source of bogus right-wing talking points that were being spread around the web. The former president of Advantage Consultants, Doug Guetzlow, I'm probably not getting that wrong, is a Tea Party right-wing radio host, and he's also the founder of a group called Axe the Tax. The point of these fake commentators was not just to push a specific agenda, it was also to deceive the unsuspecting public. And to some degree, I'm going to say that it worked. Once again, more money being spent to change your opinion. All right, let's get into this. Some good news. West Point hosts its first wedding between two men. Two West Point graduates were married last Saturday in the military academy's first wedding between two men. Larry Choate III, class of 2009, married Daniel Lennox, class of 2007, before about 20 guests. Choate, 27, taught Sunday school in the U.S. Military Academy's Cadet Chapel, and he always thought of it as the place where he would get married if he could. It's very, very sweet. West Point hosted two same-sex weddings of women in late 2012, more than a year after New York legalized gay marriage. But Saturday's wedding was the first time that it was two gentlemen. Choate and Lennox are out of the military, and they wore tuxedos for the ceremony, and some of their guests were in uniform. Let's get to the ENDA vote. Okay, ENDA is the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. Okay, it cleared a major hurdle earlier this week. Okay, in a vote of 61 to 30, the Senate voted to end debate. Not a single senator took the opportunity to give a speech opposing the bill when it came to the floor. 54 Democrats voted for cloture, joined by two Republican co-sponsors of the bill, Senators Susan Collins from Maine, Mark Kirk from Illinois, as well as Kelly Ayotte from New Hampshire, Orrin Hatch from Utah, Dean Heller from Nevada, Rob Portman from Ohio, and Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania. ENDA would make it illegal to discriminate against someone on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. It is already illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, color, sex, nationality, religion, age, or disability. Everyone, gay or straight, should have the right to work hard and earn a living, said Jeff Merkley from Oregon. He's a Democrat, the lead sponsor of ENDA. Unfortunately, right now, in the United States of America, in 29 states, you can still be fired for being gay. I must point out that Rob Portman, one of the Republicans who sponsored it, has a gay son. And his son tweeted out a celebratory message after his father voted in favor of it. The prospects in the House, though, don't look so good. So, dig this. As of Thursday, yesterday, November 7th, it passed the Senate, like full-on passed the Senate. 64-32, that's even more than it did on Monday. Okay, that with 10 Republicans voting in favor of it. Filibuster-proof majority. So it goes over to John Boehner's House. And John Boehner has called it a job killer and says that he's not going to bring it to the floor. Oh, Boehner, always doing the people's work. If you have a right-wing House member that is representing you right now, I urge you to give them a call and pose to them this question. Why? What makes it okay to discriminate against somebody for being gay? Make them give you an answer. They're representing you in Congress. You can write to them, send them an email, or tweet them or whatever, but nothing works as good as a phone call does. So that is the one that I would suggest. We're becoming a more progressive country. In Illinois, mark that this week, the Illinois General Assembly passed a bill legalizing same-sex marriage. Tuesday, putting the land of Lincoln on the course to be the 15th state to legalize same-sex marriage. The House of Representatives nearly passed the bill 6154 shortly after 2 p.m. The state Senate concurred a little more than an hour later, voting 32-29 in favor of what was called SB 10. Governor Pat Quinn, who has long supported it, says that he will sign it into law. As written, the bill needed just 60 votes instead of the supermajority of 71. With the lower number of votes required, the law will go into effect June 1st, 2014. 14 states plus Washington, D.C. allow same-sex marriage. Most recently, New Jersey, Minnesota, and Rhode Island have allowed it. And this week, Hawaii is talking about it. So I want to do this. I want to talk about, hopefully I can say this. There's a punk rock group in Russia. They don't exist anymore. That's because they were all imprisoned. The name of the group is Pussy Riot. We're talking about cats here. And recently, one of the band members, Nadezhda, I'm not even going to try to say her last name, is on her way to a new penal colony in Siberia after alleged prison abuses in her previous colony in central Russia. This was confirmed by her husband, who wrote on Twitter saying that the information comes from a reliable source. The penal colony number 50 in the town of Nizhny Ingash lies about 185 miles from the regional center of Krasnoyarsk, 4 time zones away from Moscow and sitting on Russia's Trans-Siberian Railway, with just months left of her 2-year term for performing a punk prayer in Russia's main Orthodox cathedral, protesting ties between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Kremlin. So, she and her friends are in prison because they belonged to a punk group that decided to speak out against the merging of church and state. I, for a long time, belonged to a punk rock group, and I was the vocalist and consequently the lyricist. And I got to get on stage hundreds, if not thousands of times and speak my mind. I got to say exactly what I wanted. And as much as I'd liked fetishizing about the idea that I'm doing something dangerous and they're going to come in and they're going to scoop me up and they're going to handcuff me and they're going to haul me away to prison because I'm speaking out against the man. As much as I liked that very idea that I was doing something so dangerous that I'm going to get scooped up, that it's so great that I'm really going to change people's lives. Well, it was fun, but it's not the way things work out, because in America, we have freedom, free speech, First Amendment. Say what you want, okay? And you can't be simply locked up for saying what you want. Now, there are limits to free speech, obviously. You know, don't yell fire in a crowded theater, things of that nature. Don't say you're going to kill the president, things like that. But for the most part, we really do have true freedom. Under the George W. Bush administration, and let me make crystal clear, presidents don't do anything alone. When presidents get blamed for things like the economy or wars, remember, they don't do those things alone. So if you say such and such happened on so-and-so's watch, on his watch, great. But what did his Congress look like? See, presidents don't get to write or pass legislation. Okay? But George W. Bush, after September 11th, 2001, wanted a state where people could be surveilled all the time. In my opinion, I think he simply wanted to watch everybody in America so that he could stop another terrorist attack from happening. He got forgiven by almost the entire country after the first one happened. They just wrote it off as we just got caught with our pants down, something bad happened. But George W. Bush didn't want that stain to be on his presidency if it happened again. So here comes the NSA, which does two things. It watches everything we do, reads everything we do, okay? And though that information is collected by private companies. So it collects all that information, and it's also making the private companies that are doing the surveilling very, very wealthy. Shout out to Edward Snowden, who is still doing tremendous work. So there's a lot of belly aching right now about how our freedoms are being taken away by Obama, which, by the way, he has not done anything to try to take away your freedoms. And by the way, he really can't. If he went to Congress and said, give me the right to take away people's freedoms because he's asking for it, they simply would not do it. But under George W. Bush, he had what is commonly referred to as a rubber stamp Congress. They gave him anything that he wanted. So all the folks that are bellyaching right now about losing their freedoms and blaming it on Obama really gave up those freedoms when they decided to turn a blind eye when the Republican Congress and George W. Bush began heavily surveilling people in the 2000s, in the aught years we'll call them. Now, Obama is no saint. Those things have continued under him, and I say under him because although he cannot stop them solely on his own, he has not called for those things to be stopped. And Edward Snowden has been pointing out as of late that we're not just spying on our own people, we're spying on foreign leaders, and that's infuriating people. Listen here, to liberals, you're already saying it. You're saying that you don't like the surveilling state. Conservatives are finally saying that they don't like the surveilling state because it's a Democratic president doing it. For all of you that worry about being surveilled, all the conservatives that worry about being surveilled now, well, welcome to the club. But here's the thing. You gave that away. You decided to turn that over to the previous president and the previous Congress and let them do whatever they wanted. It wasn't a problem when he did it. You're always saying the government is coming for me. They're coming for me, my land, my home, my money, my guns. And then at the same time, you gave them everything they needed in order to collect all that information and compile a dossier on you. And now they have everything they need. If they wanted to send a drone to your house and blow you up, it doesn't matter how many guns you have. Yeah, you say you're collecting all those guns for your protection, but you've stood by while our military has grown exponentially every year. The budget exponentially every year. Unimaginable weapons, bombs, planes, and all the rest. And now all your guns aren't going to protect you. You've complained about privacy while standing by and allowing, well, I'm going to call him your president, well, and now my president, but I'm not exactly standing by now, while you allowed them to collect all that information on you in the name of safety. Positions need to be consistent. And if you don't want to be surveilled, it shouldn't matter who's doing the surveilling. Call it out. Say that it's wrong. Because unfortunately, and this is what this final thought is entitled, you've already given them everything they need. They know what you're doing, websites you're looking at, what you're saying, where you're going, how many guns you have. Yeah, they now know everything about you. And the surveillance state needs to end. It wasn't okay under Bush or a Republican Congress, and it's not okay under Obama and a Democratic Senate and a Republican House. It's never okay. We deserve our freedoms, and it should have never been turned over to them. You can't only be afraid of the government when a Democrat is in charge. And by the way, you don't really need to even be afraid of the government. Just be consistent in the way you feel about it and work for everybody's freedoms, not just your own. Yeah, they have everything they need. And they need to hear from you now that it is not okay. And that if we're really serious about fighting terrorism, spying on our people isn't what's going to end it. Our foreign policy of bombing countries that we disagree with, ending that policy, that will end terrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, whoo! My goodness, am I tired. I wear myself out with this show sometimes. I want to thank you for joining me for episode 42 of The Fire You Can't Put Out. You hear all that paper rustling. That's my news. That's my news stories going everywhere. Shout out to my producer, Kevin. Shout out to the good folks over at Open Sky Radio, and to Miss Angela. I know you're out there listening somewhere. You, the listener, I want to thank you for joining me and for supporting this show. And we're going to have another barn burner next week, so join us. Of course, we'll probably still hear that 5522 was actually definitely not passed. But hey, our best days are truly ahead of us. Thank you for your continued support. We are the fire you can't put out, and we will prevail. Good day, everyone.